I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really glad that you are here, and I'm really happy that our artists have their work upstairs. That's the reason that we're all here. So thank you. I want to just talk a little bit first about what is art and who an artist can be. And if any of you are artists, I think it's always an interesting question about why you are and what's driven you to do that. And if you're not an artist, I'd ask you the same question: why are you not an artist? And what has kept you away from doing that? And also, who can be an artist? Can anyone become an artist? Do you have to go to art school to be an artist? Who decides who an artist is or what an art object is? Does a museum decide? Does a curator decide? If somebody buys it, does it make it art? I looked up the definition of the word art in the dictionary, and it's very interesting to me. It comes from both the Old Norse and the Old English, from ert or est, as in the Middle English, art, thou art. So it's essentially the verb of being. You are. Art is the verb to be. So it's this essential part of the human experience. It's very interesting to me to not have looked at that derivation until really recently, that it's a really basic human endeavor. The second definition that Webster's gives, well, the definition it gives after the derivation, is that art is the production, expression, or realm according to aesthetic principles of what is beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. Beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. So it's interesting to think about what has more than ordinary significance. I want to look at some objects and have you work with me, if you don't know what they are, to have us try to figure out what they are, and if they're art or if they're not art. And why would somebody make these things? So if you look at something like this, what does it mean? Do we have any clues in terms of where it might come from? Maybe it looks ethnographic, old or new. Do you expect to see it in a history museum? Maybe it's in your grandmother's attic. Who would make these, and why would they make them? If I told you I had one with me right now and I was going to have it for sale, how much would you pay me for it if you were interested in buying it? If you're interested, keep that number in your mind. The American sculptor John Chamberlain, who died this year, was known for kind of making sculpture out of compressed automobile parts, said, "Everybody always wants to know what my sculpture means." He said, "Even if I knew, I really couldn't tell you." He said, "But when a sculpture is nearly done, it just feels ready. Stopping is the key. You have to know when to stop. And if I feel glad that it's done, then it's a good piece." Maybe it's as simple as that. Are we glad these things are here? If we read about what an art critic says about them, does that change the way we might feel? This is a review by Roberta Smith in the New York Times of some of the objects we just saw. The forms are fierce, abstract yet fierce, muffled, extremely articulated. She relates them to Louise Bourgeois, shamans' fetishes, effigies. In a sense, the last paragraph there, are rather carefully engineered three-dimensional paintings, countering the impression that something has been hidden is the equally strong sense of something turned inside out and the inescapable impression of a mind and a personality at work, creating instances of insistent aesthetic communication. And for me, that last part is very something that stays in my mind. Instances of insistent aesthetic communication. So is it really about communication and the need to communicate? If I asked you to tell me your life story, and you had no language, and you spent at least 40 years sort of alone in a room, and didn't have contact with society, didn't speak, how would you tell me about yourself? Well, this is what Judith Scott did, and this is the artist who made the pieces that we've been seeing. I'm going to tell you Judith's story. Judith was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1942, with a twin sister. Judith was deaf and had Down syndrome. Her sister was typical. They grew up together for the first 6 years in their home in Ohio. until following the advice of the doctor, which was common at the time, Judith should be institutionalized. And they said the best way to do that is to take her out of the bed at night while the other sister's sleeping, and she won't know she's gone in the morning. So they did that. That led to 40 years of institutionalization in a not very pleasant Ohio State institution alone. They didn't realize she was deaf for 40 years, so there was no language taught, sign or otherwise. If you don't learn language early, you lose your capacity to acquire language, whether it's sign or whether it's verbal. Age 46, Judith's sister, Joyce, who lives here in Northern California, had a sort of epiphany about, I have a twin sister in an institution and this isn't what we do anymore. And through a fairly complicated process, went back to Ohio, got custody of the sister, had her released, and thought, now what do we do? And believed in the power of art and creativity as a path for people. So brought her to Creative Growth Art Center, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, where Judith sat essentially for 2 years trying to find her path. Not really productive or producing work, pretty isolated. And we're very happy tonight. I'm pleased to see the artist Sylvia 70 is here. Sylvia was a visiting artist at Creative Growth, doing a fiber workshop, if I understand correctly. And Judith became interested in what Sylvia was doing and picked up some pieces of wood and yarn and wrapped a sculpture, tied objects together, painted it, the only piece she painted, and began what would be 20 years of nonstop sculpture making, essentially. So her work was first sort of, she did this from the time she started to the time she died at age 64. It's about 20 years of this. Her process was gathering or stealing objects from the studio, bundling them, tying them together. They're really packaged. If you look at a piece like this, they're not wound. They're essentially sewn and woven. They're complicated. This is almost like a figure with a red spine. There's the secret of what's inside. Initially, conceptual artists responded to Judith's work because the idea of we don't really know what's in it. The object has multiple realities, its surface, its interior, its process, all part of her language and her communication with us. Structurally, again, they're accumulated, objects being consumed. For people that lived in an institution, often there's no private space, and objects need to be protected. And at the end of the day, Judith would take her sculpture and her things that she was working on, and she would hide them under the desk because she was afraid they'd be taken. So her path of not having language, of being institutionalized, took her to this place that influenced her aesthetic development. I'm going to interrupt for a moment for the note about language, because there's all these terms for the kinds of art that you might see in an exhibition like this. Brief history lesson. Art brut, if you know that word. Art brut is the word coined by the French artist Jean Dubuffet after the Second World War in France, when he started to study for the first time, really, art made by people that didn't go to art school, self-taught artists, art that came from unusual places, art made in secrecy and in silence and in privacy and from places that it wasn't supposed to come from. Brut in French means raw, uncooked, so art not influenced or affected by culture. Outsider art becomes, in the 70s, the title of a book by the English historian Roger Cardinal, who sort of tries to take the French idea from Dubuffet, changes it to incorporate a more modern group of artists, and his publisher, not him, his publisher names it outsider art. And that's often the word we use in English. Contemporary art, work by artists that are living, presumably. Folk art is often taught, although often on the front porch, if you will. It's not an untaught art. It's often a not academic art. Disabilities art, is there such a thing? So can an object exist in multiple categories? Can it be many of those things at the same time? Do we have to label things or not? This is the work of Judith Scott in the collection of Art Brut in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the collection that Jean Dubuffet, who coined the word Art Brut, amassed personally and went to leave it to the French state. It ended up in Switzerland. The French weren't quite understanding what to do with it culturally. So it now lives in Lausanne, Switzerland. It's a phenomenal collection. This is Judith's work in a museum in New York and Chelsea at a gallery. Very contemporary looking. This is her work in a gallery in Tokyo, the Shiseido National Foundation in the Ginza. Again, striking and contemporary. So is it outsider? Is it folk art? Are they objects? Again, in the Ginza. Is it something that has more than ordinary significance? Where did Judith Scott make her work? This is Creative Growth Art Center. We're in Oakland, California. Creative Growth was founded in the early 1970s. We believe it to be the oldest and largest center for artists with disabilities in the world. In California in 1972, was passed by the legislature called the Lanterman Act. And the Lanterman Act said that people with developmental disabilities are generally what we'd call mental retardation, Down syndrome, some forms of cerebral palsy, autism, as opposed to psychiatric illness or physical disability. The people with developmental disabilities would no longer be institutionalized like Judith Scott was, but the money from the institutions would be put into the community to serve them in different ways, in different kinds of programming. So all these people that grew up in institutions were going to be deinstitutionalized. Creative Growth founders, Elias Katz and his wife Florence Katz, an artist and a psychologist, felt that, well, what are these people going to do? And art is a transformative tool. So they believed in the power of it. Once again, put a card table in their garage with paint on it in Oakland, and people from the institution started to come and be creative. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. We serve over 150 artists with developmental disabilities in our program every day. That's the outside of the building. It's 1,500 square feet. We own the building. It's always been artist-run and artist-led. So the idea is that artists can best help a person find their path to creativity. It's not art therapy, but something very therapeutic can happen by being creative. And that's kind of a creative growth side of art therapy versus an art center. We see ourselves as an art center first, and artist-led, from me to Jennifer, who's my staff, all my interns here who are with us. Everyone has an interest or experience in art, and that's our background. Sylvia's experience with Judith, the artist leads, it's artist-led, the artist helps foster creativity. This is a view of the studio. There's no fee for the artist to attend. It's not a casual drop-in, you're scheduled. You can come between 1 and 5 days. Very mixed media, painting, drawing, ceramics, rug making, tapestry. You see some of our work upstairs in the show. Video making, Sherry Aradonis working on clay. A lot of fiber, fabric, mixed media. You see a couple of incredible animal sculptures and stitched pieces upstairs in the exhibition that comes from this program. Donald Mitchell has work upstairs along the far wall. Donald's been coming to Creative Growth, I think, for 28 or 29 years now. Takes rides over from San Francisco to Oakland, which is not an easy commute. Jackie Frank weaving. Back in the ceramics. So we'd really try to strive for the unmitigated art experience. We had an art professor stop by the studio the other day, and he was looking around, and he said, well, you know, it's so interesting to be here because I work in a context of an art school with graduate students where somebody puts a line on a piece of paper and we talk about it for 6 months. And he said at Creative Growth, people make things all the time, and it's all about the process. No one really it takes time to get intellectual about them. And it is very much about the process. This is William Tyler, who has the black and white drawings on the far wall upstairs. William's been coming every day for what, 38 years, 39 years? And I don't think he's had a sick day. So he comes 5 days a week. And his drawings, this is him with his twin brother. They're often him with his twin. A curator in New York, Matthew Higgs, says it's really one of the most incredible drawing projects of the 20th and 21st century to see someone coming into the same desk every day for 38 years and drawing. Who's done that? Contemporary artists don't do that. They change environment, they change location, they change studio, they change galleries, they change media. Merritt Wallace making dream maps. Merritt remembers the dreams in his head, and he feels them in his body on the bus when he's coming in. And when he gets to creative growth, he feels it coming out through his hands, and he draws the patterns and the roadmap of what he was dreaming about, which I wish I could do that, I think. Maybe I'd be a little afraid, but words. The artist Cindy Sherman, visiting Creative Growth, says, when she first encountered the artwork of Creative Growth, it reminded me of when I was a young struggling artist and didn't expect to make any money. Creative Growth artists remind me of that passion. They're doing something that you just have to do no matter what. They see the world with fresh eyes. Since then, I bought everything I can from them, painting, sculptures, drawing, and I've even commissioned rugs from them. I love supporting what they do. This is sometimes just the paper on the table that we throw out at the end of the day. Is pretty interesting to me. D. Rhodes painting. John Martin has the wood tools on one of the walls upstairs on the outer wall. He makes work like this sometimes. He's having a big show in Kentucky in September. It'll be nice for him, a collage party. This is the rug making program. The rug making program has always been a sort of cottage industry within Creative Growth, where artists design rugs and hand hook them. And they get pretty large, they get complex and fanciful. And it's always been treated differently. At Creative Growth, when an artist sells a piece of work, they get half of the sale price and the other half goes to the nonprofit, Creative Growth. And in the situation with the rugs, the artist is paid hourly to do the work on the rug because it's considered more of a job, or it takes an awful long time. David Albertson's work. This is a great collage. This artist has a show in White Columns Gallery in New York right now, and he collages fashion models and animal heads. And he told me that he thinks the models look happier this way. So this is Dan Miller. Dan has some incredible work in the gallery upstairs, the large black and white drawing when you come in and some of the prints. And I'm going to look at his work a little bit, and I want to consider 3 questions that I hear a lot about artists with developmental disabilities. And for me, an important question is, can an artist with a developmental disability challenge me intellectually? The second is there an artist's evolution in style and growth that we see? People say, oh, maybe it's a one-trick pony and anyone can make something once. Do artists with developmental disabilities grow and change and evolve? And what about artist intent? Does finding a path to an urgent and necessary form of communication count as artistic intent? Dan grew up in Castro Valley, California, and in high school, in the school program he was put into, he was always scribbling. His sister has told me Dan's nonverbal, pretty much. He says one word at a time often. His sister told me that his aunt really tried to get him to speak, and she spent a long time with him spelling words out to him and trying to get him to say the words. And he wasn't with much success, but it seems to be something that stuck with him as he grew up. The scribbling led a counselor to feel that Dan should come to creative growth. Again, maybe there's something creative going on there, we don't know. And I think the family felt like, well, we don't know what else to do, why not? And you have to remember that 25, 30 years ago, things were really different. There's been a fundamental shift in the way people with developmental disabilities are perceived in terms of how they're mainstreamed in school, how we value their contributions, how we look at them, how they use adaptive technology. So it's really been a rapid shift. Dan's work is really comprised of word and number patterns, one on top of the other, until they form these large abstract patterns. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across the top. Underneath the 1 and 2, you see the light bulb. You see the light bulb drawn. His early work had the figure drawn and the words around it. Like most artists who become abstract, they get more interested in the abstraction and less interested in the figure. Upper left-hand corner, A, B, C, D. Bottom right, there's a San Francisco in there. You can start to see the San F very well. So he starts to write these, and then he becomes really interested in the graphic qualities of the letters and the words. And he repeats them one on top of the other. Blue, aluminum. 1, 2, 3, 4. Peace. Black box, black light, paper. So essentially for Dan, what is the relationship between the form and the content? The content essentially is his words, it's his communication. And then there's this formal presentation that he has in terms of the way they look. And I think about what leads what, you know. And what's interesting for me about his work is that you can't have the form without the content here. The content is the speech. The speech takes the form of the mark he makes. And it's this total integration of the two that is so interesting to see. Dan has started to type. Again, you know, does the artist evolve? His sister said when he was a boy, he used to take the typewriter apart, lay it all out, put it back together again, and never type. So about 2 years ago, there was a program we had at Creative Growth where somebody was, visiting artist was working with language and words. Some of our artists like to write a lot. So there were old typewriters and all these things around. So Dan sits down and starts to type. And the surprise is, yeah, he can spell. I guess all those lessons with the aunt sort of penetrated. He knew how to type, although he had never used the machine before. And he makes the same choices. Sometimes they're organized, linear, geometric. Sometimes they're muddled, one on top of each other. It's a very large piece. And now and this is really similar to the piece upstairs. Dan is our first, there are 2 Creative Growth artists who have their work in the permanent collection in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Dan is our first. And that happened about 3 years ago in a drawing show on artists who sort of break the tradition of drawing and look at it in a new way, and then the museum purchased his work. If I can figure out what I'm doing here, you're going to see how Dan draws. So this is Dan painting. So sometimes there's a formative word or an idea that he has. And his sister will say, house. His sister will say, oh, that idea, that word, this is from an experience. There's the roof, an experience we had growing up, and I didn't even know he was paying attention. Car, pin, ter. He will sometimes say this word that he's working on. So he will say electric, electric, electric. You know, it's kind of, if I ask him a question, Dan, are you hungry? He'll say yes or no, or do you want to go to the bathroom, or are you okay? He'll respond to questions like that, but he doesn't really make sentences. He asks a series of repetitive questions There were some incidents in his life about getting his hand cut on a lid, opening a can, and a light bulb breaking that were really traumatic events for him. So he asks, will the light bulb break? Will the light bulb break? Or what about the light bulb? So sometimes he'll pose a question like that repeatedly. So here he's building the house. And if you look, you'll see that he will often get interested in the graphic qualities of the letters. And you'll see sometimes when he spells, he'll skip a letter and then come back and add it with a way that becomes interesting to him, or suddenly just becomes the marks. And this is how those images build. And you know, Dan paints. These are very large paintings now, and this is probably as long as this wall here. Very long scroll that Dan's worked on, piece by piece. And here he is at the Creative Growth Gallery looking at some of his recent large work last year, selecting for an exhibition that he had in Paris at a contemporary gallery there. So we try to have the artists be a partner in presenting their work. If they don't want to show their work or sell their work, that's fine. You know, Dan will go back and see these pieces that are very abstract, and I'll say, what word was that? And he'll remember what the idea was. So he remains connected to them as ideas or as paragraphs, almost like, you know, he's looking at his writing. Picking a very large scroll there. His work in a contemporary gallery in New York. It's very important for creative growth that we lead with the artist as a contemporary artist, not as a person with a disability. The disability is a very important part to who the artist is. It's a very important part culturally in terms of what the work looks like and how it's made and where it comes from. But we want it to be that the art leads, and if the art is interesting for you, you find out who made it and what the context of its creation is. And that's been our direction. There's Dan. I'm going to talk a little bit about some other programs that Creative Growth has, some other projects that we're involved in terms of the community. This is our gallery. We renovated the building. We own this building, and we renovated it about 8 or 9 years ago. So it's a pretty contemporary looking space. We change the exhibitions maybe every 7 weeks or so. We do a lot of exhibitions in art fairs, museums, galleries around the world. We have 3 different museum exhibitions going on this month, I think. This, someone asked me on the way in if we ever show work of non-creative growth artists or academically trained or other artists. In this show we did. It's Dan Miller on the left, a creative growth artist named Ori Ramirez in the middle, and the work of David Byrne and Brian Eno on the right from the Talking Heads, and who came as a guest artist, some of our artists. And that's David Byrne with, at the opening for that show, supporting our folks. Happiness for all the artists. He was dating Cindy Sherman at the time, and that's a photograph of hers that she graciously donated to us. So opening in our gallery, we really see that the gallery is a portal for having our artists be seen and received by the public. It's a public venue, and to be advocates for what people with developmental disabilities can do for society and how creative they can be. We've had now 3 annual fashion shows. This is a picture from the first one. A lot of our artists make clothes, sewing, dresses, fabric. So this artist made the hat and the skirt, and it was a gallery opening, and it just turned into this spectacular event. So we've sort of it's become a tradition. And for me, I think it's really important to look at how we, this is often as we sometimes do in the gallery, how we blend who our people are. So the fashion show has become that there are, you know, professional models, and there are creative growth artists as models, and there's work that our artists have made that they're wearing, and the professional models wear things that are creative, and it really just blends the whole thing. Really, if you think about maybe someone with Down syndrome or a developmental disability, probably not born, the parents aren't thinking she's going to be a model. So if we can work against that stereotype and really change people's ideas of really what human beings can do and how they can participate in society, that's kind of a double dipping for us in some ways, as far as I'm concerned. We're also not afraid of commercial art and see that as a really viable way for our artists to participate in society. This is a catalog for a furniture company called McGuire, Jackson Square, photographed at Creative Growth. So really here what we're selling is what they're selling is the piece of glass and the legs to the table. But Creative Growth makes the chair look great, I think. And yeah, I think it's a really, I showed you that one. We did a project a few years ago with Marc Jacobs, Mark from Marc Jacobs, where we designed bags and wallets and t-shirts for other stores worldwide. This is a poorly taken shot of the Marc store in New York with the Creative Growth art in the windows. The products that we did there were bags like this, t-shirts. These are sort of vinyl carrying bags. And I just think it's great that Creative Growth watches by Dan Miller. I just think it's really great that Creative Growth artists can design for Marc Jacobs. We've also had a fashion line for several years called Creative Growth for Everybody. This was one of the fashion lookbooks, I think from the second year. And this featured up-and-coming young fashion stars in New York as models for our artists' work. Recognize Dan Miller's work on the shirts there. An artist named Dwight McIntosh, one of our first internationally recognized artists on these shirts. Donald Mitchell's clothing, his work upstairs. An artist named Carrie Dominakis. Oh, and that's our PG-13 rated underwear shot. We work with a progressive, organic, holistic underwear company in Berkeley that gives profits from the underwear to progressive causes and nonprofits, and we've designed a series of work from them based on, you can see from the original work, which is on the wall. This is Barney's, New York. They've often given us their Madison Avenue window every year to promote Creative Growth and our artists. This was our shop inside Barney's. And some books. We try to do some publications. I have one more artist story to give. It would be about 10 minutes. Are we okay on time, I think? Right, we have 10? Okay. And then have time for your questions. This is an artist named William Scott. William is, as of a month ago, 2 months ago, our second artist to have his work acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. William grew up in Hunters Point, Bayview in San Francisco, which is industrial and poor in projects and not a very pretty place to live. A lot of guns and violence and drugs. And that's William modeling. He makes a Halloween mask for himself every year. That's his Frankenstein alter ego. William, a librarian at the local library in his neighborhood when he was 17 or so, said, I think William's got something going on in terms of talent or creativity, and knew about this place in Oakland called Creative Growth, and maybe he should go there. So he started to take the train over by himself. And I think just kind of, I wasn't there at the time, it's 26 years ago or something, showed up at the door and we let him in, because that's kind of what we do. So, and he's been coming ever since. William is really interesting in that he uses his work, his painting, his self-portrait, as a tool to really transform reality. This is a self-portrait in the Relationship Social Friendship Society. On his tie it says popular. William Scott, the tolerant, popular guy. He paints himself like he wants himself to be. He paints the world like he hopes it will become. Queen Latifah is wholesome. He also paints people that he wants to be his friends, that he wants in his life. When people like Queen Latifah don't call him back, his mother says, well, William, you should have to look at local girls. So he's invented a series of women called citizen girlfriends. She's a citizen girlfriend. She's going to run the singles ministry, friendship, love ministry for him, engagement party to celebrate his 40th birthday. William always pays close attention to the back pockets of women's jeans, it seems. This is Inner Limit Dream Girls. William has a big exhibition in London right now at the Hayward Gallery. Big banner outside the building. The exhibition is called Alternative Guide to the Universe. And it's about artists who really use their work as a way to change reality and change the world. And he certainly characterizes that. It seems to me now that when the things he paints don't become true, he goes to greater lengths in terms of the technique, the way he paints them. In this case, he has, I think, a series of UFOs that now deliver things to Earth to make them come real for him. This is him as World Police Planet Officer. He wants his neighborhood to be safe. And this is one way he can make it happen. Inner limits is a word he uses, and as far as I can tell and understand it correctly from him, inner limits is for the people in his neighborhood that have been killed, and they come back to life in a better way. So they're sort of reborn. These were the toughest people, and now they come back wholesome, and he's sort of taken away the death and that trauma from his neighborhood. San Francisco redeveloped in the year 2030, praise Frisco at night. We saw this image on the Marc Jacobs bag earlier. This is Bayview, Hunters Point redeveloped. So he really often will draw a map. Sometimes he'll draw the city as it is and paint over it in terms of how he wants it to be seen. It's clean and safe and wholesome. And he uses Disney and gospel, these words, to mean happy and better. This is Market Street in San Francisco at 9th Street. The building on the left is called Fox Plaza. It's a pretty accurate rendition of it. Looking towards the ferry building. He loves the old buses and streetcars. And it's a better place to be. There's this intersection of the past and the future that he doesn't seem to differentiate between. So this is Gospel Square, developed in 2010. This painting is from before then, I think, with the old buses because he's nostalgic about certain sorts of things. Home Depot, Gospel Home. This is a very large painting of San Francisco. That's a panel almost the size of this wall on wood. And what William did here was he kind of did a photorealistic drawing and painting of San Francisco. And then as you can see, he whited out parts of it and built buildings, painted buildings over it because he wanted it to be the way he wanted it to look. So he's imagining, that's the detail, he's imagining how it should be. Not finishing sometimes is part of his aesthetic. And I think sometimes he doesn't like to finish because he has to come to that point of conflict where the painting and reality don't match. They're not in alignment. And I think he doesn't know what to do sometimes when that happens. So by not finishing, he leaves it a little tentative or a little open to interpretation. A completely different map. Looking down, sometimes he astounds me in terms of the way, again, this sort of evolution or this different vision, and these streets have phenomenal names. If I can read them, it's Cinderella Town Street and Mama's House Avenue, Hollywood Lane, Bahama Town, Royal Nice Gospel Town, Disneyland Boulevard. And here, Wholesome Encounters with the rebirth of the United States as peaceful planning place. He's renamed all these countries in the world. Janet Jackson Caribbean, Soul Train City, Martin Luther King Town, California Love State, Handsomeville, Michael Jackson World, Positive State. Pretty good names. This is a phenomenal piece. It's William Scott as Billy the Kid. So William becomes Billy back to 1975, his high school years. In Another Life, he's written, 1970, Another Life. And what he does here is he really paints himself the way he wanted to be. Happy, successful basketball player, no disabilities. And he believes that he can repaint the past in a way that's so real that the present will change. You know, can an artist with a developmental disability challenge me intellectually? He can right there. It's a pretty great idea. Jesus' Peace. Jesus, William Scott, Our Friendship. William is the new Black Jesus. So he gets troubled when he feels like the painting doesn't really transform reality, and that's the difficult part. But he really, I think about the idea of, you know, what are the odds for an African American kid in a poor neighborhood in San Francisco with dual diagnosis, growing up in the projects, having his work get into the Museum of Modern Art in New York? Like, what are those odds? Are they 1,000 to 1? Are they 1,000,000 to 1? Are they 1,000,000,000 to 1? It's a pretty incredible thing he's done.
Has he ever been there?
He's been to New York, yeah. His work, he hasn't, I don't know if he's been to the MoMA. He was at a show at White Columns. We'll have a picture of it soon, but he hasn't been there since, he didn't have his work on the wall yet. It was an acquisitions committee. When William was a teenager, he had an accident and his body was burned. So he had to go to the San Francisco General Hospital burn unit. And he was bringing Jennifer and I ads from papers about creams that take scars away, you know, recently. And I said, William, you know, you have a really bad burn from 20 years ago. That's not going to really help you. I'm sorry. So William started, you know, painted the hospital. He's going to go back there. He's going to take it away, go back to the moment and make the history. You know, these are from memory. You know, phenomenal rendition.
The perspective is amazing.
I know. And how they change and how one's better than the next. And you often don't see an artist who does a lot of work that's both architectural and portraiture. He's unusual in that way, too. He's built the housing projects where he's grew up. This is an exhibition of his at the Play de Tokyo in Paris, I believe. Masks on the wall. He builds the girlfriends out of clay, out of paper mache, out of cardboard. This is William on the right at an opening of his in New York at White Columns. You know, every hipster artist on the planet would love to have their work there. And it was Williams. This is Williams at the dinner in the gallery. This is William and his mom and his sister and his cousin at the opening. And, you know, William makes enough money from his work now that he was able to bring them all out to New York. And I think they had spent more time going to see Dreamgirls and ride the subway than, William, you're going to come to your opening? I'm on the subway. I'm on the subway. So the thing for me about William that's so interesting is, well, this portrait he painted the morning after Michael Jackson died. And we call it Little Michael. And I see in it so much about William's work, both how we see this collision between the past and the present and the future, like loaded in this little boy is everything we know that's going to happen. You know, you see it in his eyes, you see it in his shoulders, you see it in his face, this tension, you know, this little innocent kid, and it's all just layered on top of each other. And, you know, for William, when he struggles with is it going to change reality, I think what he doesn't see is that his work has changed his reality. He's become a successful artist and he's found a way to achieve what a lot of people haven't, including this painting on the cover of Modern Painters magazine, which is pretty great for him. That's how to reach creative growth. And you're all invited to come and visit. Oakland's not that far away, unless there's an accident on the 101. Thank you for seeing the exhibition.